This week in Math 060, we're going to talk about word problems or story problems or application problems. They go by a variety of different names. And math instructors see these problems as something that brings up an interesting contradiction. Most students don't like word problems, but at the same time they always want to know how the math they're learning is useful to them in the real world. And it's the word problems that get us there. Now, word problems are typically kind of idealized versions of real-world math problems, so sometimes they seem overly simplistic. And that's a good thing when you're first learning material. They're meant not necessarily to show you real-world problems that you will solve, but they're meant to give you an idea of kind of the different areas where the math you're learning can be used to solve problems and what some of those simpler problems in those areas look like. The real world is ultimately a very complex place. The problems get very difficult very quickly, and that's not where you want to start doing problem solving when you're learning new math skills. But that's one of the primary purposes of word problems. There are others, and we'll kind of get at those as we go through this presentation today. So most people find word problems to be pretty difficult, and the biggest reason for that is because you don't know what the math problem is to be solved. You're given a bunch of sentences, English language, and you need to go through a process of translating that into a math problem. And that is a difficult thing to do. The English language and mathematics don't always play well together. The order in which we say and write words isn't necessarily the same as the order in which we would write things down mathematically. There are some good cues that we can use in terms of certain words that mean certain things, but there are also an awful lot of ambiguities that arise in the process as well. And those ambiguities mean it's not always easy to determine if we're going to add or subtract, multiply or divide, if we need one variable or two in algebra, if we might need to draw a graph or create a table. Those are the things that we need to figure out. So we're going to suggest a 5-step method to solve word problems. The first step is familiarize. That's reading the problem and understanding what's being asked. The second step is translating. That is taking that English language statement or problem and turning it into an actual math problem using numbers and math symbols. Solving that problem that you've then identified, checking in some fashion to see if the work you did makes sense and if your answer is correct, and then finally stating your answer, which for story problems, word problems, application problems should look a little bit different than just for our standard math problems. The familiarizing step is one where you should really spend a large portion of your time. It's a good idea to read the problem more than once, sometimes 2, 3, 4 times. If you don't understand it the first time or the second time, keep reading it. Try to figure out, first of all, what it is you're being asked to do. What are you trying to find? Then determine what kind of information that you are given to solve that question. If at all possible, draw a sketch of the situation. Not looking for you to be an artist, just trying to sketch out some idea of what something might look like. If there's a rectangle involved, draw a rectangle and label it. Triangle, draw a triangle and label it. If there's a tree and someone's looking up at the tree, draw a stick tree, stick person, and label. If you can, make a table, fill in the things you know, and leave the things that you don't know blank. That's sometimes a good way to organize information, especially in larger, more complicated story problems. If you need to use variables, it's generally a good idea to try to use as few as possible. The more variables you have, the more complex the solution process looks like. The fewer you have, the easier the math typically is. And you want to clearly name each variable and what it represents. Write it down so that when you get to the end, you still have a way to go back to the beginning and take a look if you don't exactly remember after you've been working on a problem for 15 or 20 minutes potentially. When you translate, you want to remember that math equations ultimately are equivalent to English sentences. We read them out loud, and they kind of read like English. Sometimes it's a good idea to pick values for your variables. You're not going to pick correct ones, but just pick some kind of value for your variables and plug them into the math equation you have and just see if things are working roughly the way you think they should. Are things being subtracted in a way that makes sense? Are things being multiplied or divided in places and in a way that makes sense? Are any constants that you're using to multiply by or add, do they make sense? Just try to get a feel for whether the kind of math is working. Make sure you're translating words and phrases appropriately. Most textbooks are going to have information somewhere, a table or something that's going to give you an idea of some of the common words that are useful to know how to translate for the types of problems you are working on. And see if the values you chose work the same way in your math equation as they did in English. That is, read that math equation and see if it comes back to your English statement, at least in some equivalent way. If it doesn't, you're going to have to rework your equation until you can get both things to work out and at least appear to say the same thing. Solving, you're typically going to be using techniques that you are currently studying. You may need to use some ideas from previous in the course or even from earlier courses, but the core idea is typically going to be from whatever it is you are currently studying. To check your answer, one of the good things to do is just make sure your answer makes sense. We talked about this in the homework video previously. Make sure your answer seems reasonable and logical. If you have $200 in a savings account, for example, and you're trying to figure out what the amount would be after a year and some interest, it's really unlikely it's going to be $200,000. That doesn't seem like a reasonable answer. And if that's what you're getting, it seems like something has probably gone wrong. Sometimes you can take your answer and kind of plug it back into the original English sentence. Replace the unknown words with your number and work things through and see if it works. You can check things directly that way sometimes. The last thing you're going to do is state your answer, and it's a good idea to state your answer clearly in the form of a sentence. All right. Story problems have context. Their answers aren't just numbers. They're numbers that mean something. Those numbers have units. Those numbers apply to things. So a short sentence that restates some of the original question, puts your answer into it, includes any units that are involved like feet or dollars or whatever. That's a really good way to communicate the answer to a story problem. Some other ideas for dealing with word problems: take your time. Spend a lot of time up front on the familiarizing part. If you don't understand what the problem is asking, you're probably not going to be able to solve it, so spend a lot of time there if you need to. Through the whole process, make sure you're moving slowly and methodically. Don't try to rush too fast. One of the big mistakes that math students make, especially at the college level, and I think this is because students are often trained to think this way from elementary school, is that it's all a race and it's about what you can do, how much you can do, and how fast. And that's not true. Slow down, take your time, and try to minimize mistakes. All right. Don't be afraid to be wrong. Sometimes multiple times, but try to learn from those mistakes. As I've said before, learning from mistakes can be some of the most powerful learning you do. Finally, you want to be flexible. Ultimately, word problems, just problem solving in general, is something that requires a certain level of creativity. And that's something you can learn to do and get better at. You may need to try to estimate an answer. You may need to do some trial and error type calculations to figure out how things are working. You may need to or want to sketch some diagrams, create tables, draw graphs. There are all sorts of different things you can do. The more you try these things, the more you discover where they work and where they maybe don't. Finally, don't be afraid to walk away from a problem and come back to it later. If you're really getting frustrated with it, walk away. It turns out your brain continues to work on this. And when you come back later, your brain may have solved it, and you'll suddenly look at it and realize, oh, this is what I need to do. This is how I answer that problem. Personally, I know this has happened to me. It happened to me when I was in college a few times. I even remember the one time when I woke up in the middle of the night, about 3 in the morning, and I had the answer, so I turned on the light and started working on finishing a problem. Didn't make my roommate real happy, but again, sometimes that's the power of our subconscious mind and the way it continues to work on problems. But again, don't be afraid to work on creativity, work on your ability to be flexible, and take your time with story problems.